The 10 Plagues of Egypt. When Moses returned to Egypt as God commanded, he and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh with a message from the Lord, "Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh refused, saying, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Exodus 5 verses 1-2. Because of Pharaoh's stubbornness and refusal to free the Israelites, God sent a series of 10 plagues upon Egypt to show his power and to compel Pharaoh to release his people. Each plague was a direct challenge to the gods of Egypt and demonstrated that the Lord, the God of Israel, was the true God. The first plague, the plague of blood. Moses, following God's instructions, struck the Nile River with a staff, and the water turned into blood. The fish in the river died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. Exodus 7 verses 20-21. The second plague, the plague of frogs. God caused frogs to come up out of the Nile and overrun the land. They were in houses, in beds, and in kitchens, everywhere. Pharaoh begged Moses to pray to the Lord to take away the frogs, and he promised to let the Israelites go. But once the frogs were gone, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let them go. Exodus 8 verses 3-4, 8-15. The third plague, the plague of gnats. At God's command, Aaron struck the dust of the ground with his staff, and the dust turned into gnats that covered people and animals throughout Egypt. The magicians of Egypt could not replicate this plague and said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen. Exodus 8 verses 16-19. The fourth plague, the plague of flies. Swarms of flies filled the houses of the Egyptians and ruined the land. However, in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, no flies were found. Pharaoh again promised to let the people go if the plague was removed, but once it was, he changed his mind and refused. Exodus 8 verses 21-32. The fifth plague, the plague of livestock. God sent a deadly disease on the livestock of the Egyptians, killing their horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. But none of the livestock belonging to the Israelites died. Even so, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not let the people go. Exodus 9 verses 3-7. The sixth plague, the plague of boils. God instructed Moses and Aaron to take handfuls of soot from a furnace and toss it into the air in front of Pharaoh. It became fine dust over the whole land of Egypt and caused festering boils to break out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, but Pharaoh still refused to listen. Exodus 9 verses 8-12. The seventh plague, the plague of hail. God sent a severe hailstorm, with lightning flashing to and fro. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. The hail struck down everything in the fields, both men and animals, and stripped every tree. But in Goshen, where the Israelites were, there was no hail. Pharaoh admitted that he had sinned and promised to let the people go, but when the hail and thunder stopped, he hardened his heart again. Exodus 9 verses 23-35. The eighth plague, the plague of locusts. God sent locusts that covered the land and devoured everything left after the hail, the crops and fruit trees. Pharaoh's officials urged him to let the Israelites go, saying, "Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?" But even after this devastating plague, Pharaoh refused to let them go. Exodus 10 verses 12-20. The ninth plague, the plague of darkness. For 3 days, darkness covered Egypt, a darkness so thick that it could be felt. No one could see or move for 3 days, yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Despite this, Pharaoh still would not let the Israelites go. Exodus 10 verses 21-23. The 10th plague, the plague of the firstborn. God told Moses that he would bring one final plague on Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the slave girl, and even the firstborn of the cattle, would die. But the Israelites were to mark their doorframes with the blood of a lamb, and when the Lord saw the blood, he would pass over their homes, sparing them from this plague. At midnight, The Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. There was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Exodus 12 verses 29 to 30. Finally, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested." The Israelites left Egypt, taking with them great wealth given to them by the Egyptians, who were eager for them to go. Exodus 12 verses 31 to 36. Reflect on the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt. How does this story demonstrate God's power, justice, and mercy? What lessons can be learned about obedience, persistence, and the consequences of hardening one's heart? Write about how this story impacts your understanding of God's protection and provision for His people, and how you can apply these lessons in your own life.